Alrighty, welcome to GameSense, everybody. We're real happy to be here and hope that you guys are having a happy build season. We're kicking off the second episode of our season 3 with our second annual holiday special here. Every day. I'm Francis O'Rourke, and I'm here with the rest of the GameSense crew and a very special guest who I'll introduce in just a quick second. Before we get started, I wanted to make sure to thank our sponsor, Symbotic, for supporting our efforts and making what we do here at GameSense possible. To learn more about what they do, go to Symbotic.com. All right, as always, I just want to remind everybody that this is not an official first broadcast. Our views and the views of our guests are our own, and nothing we say here is official in any kind of fashion. Also, we don't take ourselves too seriously, so you shouldn't either. Have fun, and if you don't like what we've said, go out and prove us wrong. With that, I want to introduce everybody. With us tonight behind the scenes is Ty Tremblay, on assignment in Virginia. And of course, our fabulous director, Stephanie Morrison, helping us make sure the whole show goes off without a hitch. On air tonight, we've got Evan Morrison and Naveed Shaffa, and our newest member of GameSense, Ruth Toomey. Ruth, why don't you give us a little bit about yourself?
Hey guys, so I've been doing First for about 10 years now. I started in 2006 as a high school senior with Team 1735, the Green Reapers in Worcester, Massachusetts. From there, I went to WPI, joined Team 190 where I met Evan and Francis. And we just happened to be part of the World Championship team, which was pretty cool. After that, I moved back to mentoring with 1735, and I was with them for another 2 years, and something felt off, and I ran out of a lot. I needed more free time, but I still wanted to stay involved, so I moved to volunteering pretty much full-time, and I've been doing that since 2006. I've served as lead queuer in many events across New England the last 6 years, and I've been very lucky to be a volunteer coordinator at a few different off-season events, most notably with 319 and 190, both of whom I'm still very close with. And this year I rejoined 190 as I work at WPI. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for giving us your lowdown there, Ruth. And we got one last person on the show today. Last but not least is FRC Director Frank Merrick. Frank, why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Oh, sure. My name's Frank Merrick. I'm the Director of First Robotics Competition. And that's about it. I wish I was more complex. I'm just a really simple person.
Noted.
That's where we are. That's where I am.
There you go. Noted actor and king of FRC here.
Owner of a castle, apparently.
Yes, owner of a castle. Yes. All right. So before we get started, if anyone has any questions for us or for Frank today as we talk about the show or go about the show, you can send them to us via our Twitch chatbot. If you're watching on Twitch TV, in the chat, just type ! the letter Q, and then your question. And our bot will automatically catalog it and send it to us. And if we like it, we'll answer it on air. All right. So just to let everyone know what's going to happen in this show, we're going to talk with Frank about the process behind Stronghold, what the GDC thought of the game, and sort of get a little bit of behind the scenes as to what exactly went on up in Manchester this past off-season. But before we do that, there's one thing we got to catch up on from our first episode of the season, which was the reveal of the Stronghold teaser. If you don't remember, you can check it out on YouTube. We had a special show with some guests. We had Christine from 125 and Jared from Team 254, as well as the entirety of Team 148 and 2337, we had them on to give live feedback as to what happened right after we revealed the Stronghold trailer. And so we promised these people, whoever got it right, whoever got the closest to what actually the game was going to get a free GameSense t-shirt. So we want to announce the winner right here, right now. The winner of all those 4 people is, drum roll, everybody, drum roll. Okay, fine, that's a drum roll. It is Christina Tia from Team 125. She got it the most right by guessing 2 things. She guessed that there was going to be a drawbridge in the game, which is true. And she said, and I quote, "What if a defense is something else? Something that doesn't have to be robot-to-robot interaction." So she guessed what defenses were. So good luck on her for doing that. One other thing, though, I got to point out, is that we have a spy among us, apparently. Evan Morrison got 9 different things correct about the game during his time on the show. He guessed that there were going to be obstacles. He guessed that you would have to break through some sort of barrier. He guessed that different parts of the field could only be accessed by a single robot or a single alliance. He guessed launching. He, in fact, said the word, "You're going to have to breach the defenses." He said that once you capture the Stronghold, your flag gets raised. And he said that there is no game piece you have to break through. You just have to get to the other side. All of these things.
9 guesses out of how many, Francis, though? That's
okay, fair enough. I will say...
It just sounds like he created a laundry list
yes.
of every possible combination. No.
Throwing up boulders at the tower and one's bound to go in.
That's awesome, though. Really raise the flag? That's amazing. That is amazing.
So I got to say, if you want to watch it, you can figure it out for yourself. Evan guessed like probably about an equal amount wrong, but considering we had a game, we had a trailer that didn't really give us any information about what the game beside the name was.
Great. That's amazing.
I think it was pretty cool. So good on Evan for doing that. All right. So first up,
I wasn't in New Hampshire during any point during the last year. I swear.
Well, that's kind of funny you say that, because I'm sure Frank's going to talk about this a little bit about how what the inspiration for Stronghold was and sort of where that came from. Frank, do you want to just talk a little bit about
sure.
what the genesis of the game was?
This was for the most part, it started back in May. We actually made a trip out to California to visit Walt Disney Imagineering with some of the staff. Dean was there, Don Bosey was there, some of the FRC staff was there as well, and we did sort of an exercise with Disney that was, I think it's called carousel brainstorming. I'm not sure on that. I don't know that that's what they call it. But essentially, you have these different stations, and each station dealt with some aspect of FRC or FIRST, and it was very broad, like first outreach. How do we kind of expand? I think maybe, I don't know if international expansion was one of those stations as well. And at each station, there's a facilitator from Disney who kind of helps you talk through things. And what happens is you break into groups and you rotate through the various stations. That's why it's called carousel brainstorming. And one of the stations was, the 2016 game. And one of the Disney folks was actually, if I remember right, he was actually a video game designer for Disney. This is my recollection. Now, this was months ago. This is kind of what I remember. And somewhere along the line, when I was at a station, and everyone else, I'm sure, because I think he was one of the facilitators there, he used the term tower defender. And in that tower defender phrase is an entire story, if you think about it. If I say to you the phrase tower defender, you immediately get an idea, and I think most folks would, okay, there's a tower, there's some kind of defense, so there's obviously some kind of conflict. So after we went through and we generated all these kind of ideas, we got back to New Hampshire, and we all formalized, or many of us formalized, the ideas that we had. In the end, we ended up with 24 semi-formal proposals that we had. Of those 24, 3 were some variations on Tower Defender. And I actually sent you guys an image on one of those 24. I don't know if you want to show that.
Yeah, I think Steph's going to throw it up right now on screen.
If you can pop that up. And if you look at this, hopefully it's going to be coming up. The image actually is, if you look at it, kind of some of the elements of the game are there. It had an opening where there was some, where you would be scoring some type of game object. There was sort of a ladder. It was all sort of inside the field, so it was very basic, and you might not even recognize it as sort of a tower defender game.
Yeah, here we go.
But Oh, here we go. Okay, there it is. Now this had you can see, yeah, you can see right there. And so it had, it had a ladder for climbing. It had like a tower opening. This version even included sort of the scoring lights, like the life lights or the strength lights we're calling them now. This was one of the early versions. When we developed it a little more, we combined some ideas. This version did not have the movable defenses in it yet, but if you go to the next version of the game that this developed into, you can see, there you go. You can see that this is very much some basics of what you would recognize as first Stronghold. Those defenses there are movable. There are only 2. This is just an early sketch, but you can see now you have more of an actual tower there. And the movable defenses themselves actually came, which I think is really one of the key aspects, really, I would say the breakthrough aspect of the game, of these movable defenses. And that was an idea from Derek Foster, who's our mechanical engineering manager, which is good. He came up with the idea because I think if anyone else did, there's just so much work to designing these defenses.
Yeah.
It would have been a real challenge. He may have turned him down, but anyway, it's his idea. So he and his team, had to go through designing all those defenses. But here you can see essentially the basics of the game. Now it evolved from here. There was something very interesting that happened along the way to First Stronghold, though. On June 23rd, we had actually narrowed these 24 ideas down to 4. This was what you're looking at was one of the 4. On the 26th, we had a bigger weekend gathering, and we really got down and we said, okay, the tower defender concept is the concept that we're going with. We had 3 different stories. Disney is huge on story, of course. That's one of the really big learnings that we had from Disney this year. Disney is huge on stories, and we had 3 different stories that went along with that. But the medieval story with a tower defender in a medieval kind of mode was kind of leading the way. It wasn't the final decision yet. Now, Team 1189, the Gearheads out of Michigan, had actually won the FedEx Innovation Challenge that they had put on. The prize for winning last year, the prize for winning the FedEx Innovation Challenge was being able to make a pitch to FRC, make a game pitch to FRC.
Whoa.
3 days after we had decided that we were going to have a tower defender game with the concept that medieval theme was probably, not sure exactly, but that was at least a leading contender for what the theme was. 3 days after that, they released a little bit of information on the pitch that they were going to make. They were planning to make the pitch on July 10th. And the pitch that they came out with that we saw was a tower defender game set in the Middle Ages, and it was called Medieval Mayhem. And I think I even gave you guys the logo that they had provided to us. So there you go.
So that looks like a boulder.
Yeah.
Yes, it does, doesn't it?
It is a boulder.
Unbelievably,
yes.
They, completely independent of everything that we were doing, had developed a medieval tower defender game that they were going to pitch to us in a couple weeks. Now, when we saw that they had posted some of the information of the game, I gave one of their mentors a call and said, can you maybe take that down so other people can't see it, because it makes it complicated. It's hard for us to use ideas that you have if they're out in the community. They understood completely. They took it down. It was no problem at all. And then they came in and made this fantastic pitch on July 10th. It was fantastic. It was so well thought out, and we just loved it. Of course, we had to watch it all with a straight face, knowing that we had a game that it was going to be very similar to in 2016. But they really did a fantastic job with the whole thing.
Oh, awesome.
So that's kind of how we got to, and I'm going to be doing a blog about this interesting aspect of what the 1189, the Gearheads, did, because it's just so fascinating that they came up with very similar game to what we did, totally independently. And what it did for us was kind of verify that, or support the idea that a game like this was kind of in the air. The theme was very hot. There's a lot of things you could do here. It just all kind of clicked. So it was all good at the end. But I'll tell you, when I first saw that they had posted this Medieval Mayhem, I was a little like, yeah. But it was all good.
Can I ask a real quick question? So it sounds like you guys sort of had I'm going to use a word that gets used in a different game I play. Like a top-down design. You guys kind of came up with a theme and then worked the game into it from there. correct me if I'm wrong, but
it was more. I would say it was more mixed than that.
Okay.
And this is a conversation we actually had with Disney, and it's fascinating how they end up doing it. I would say that it was more mixed than that. If you look at the 24 concepts that we formalized, many of them were sort of ground up. Like, here's sort of a concept of a game mechanic or an interesting game, and here's sort of a theme to go with it. But some of them were more top down. Here's a theme. You take the theme and then put the game with it. What Disney said to us was very interesting, that they almost always start with the story and then build a ride around it. However, there are rare occasions, I've been told, where they have this great ride mechanic that is just so cool they have to do something with it, and then they'll take that ride mechanic and then put the theme on top of it. So even they kind of do it both ways. But primarily from Disney, the way I'm not a Disney expert, I'm just telling you what I've heard and what I remember, is that they start with kind of the story and the theme, and that is really what makes what they do so special, because it's all very emotional and grabbing, and it's really not just about kind of the ride itself. It's about experiencing the story in the ride.
Yeah, I got to say that when I first saw the real full game, I was incredibly impressed with how it was all sort of contained in this theme. What do the rest of you guys think about that?
Dead silence. No, and this actually kind of goes with one of the questions that I had, which is, did all of these, you talk about story, but in my mind, story is not always necessarily the same thing as theme.
Right.
And so did all of these 24 concepts, or the majority of them, have a theme that went along with the story? Or was it very much you ended up with this tower defense
strategies? Yeah.
Yeah, and the medieval theme really fit well with it, but it wasn't necessarily tied from the very beginning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you're right. It wasn't tied from the very beginning. That was, I think, the conception of some of the folks that actually contributed those like 3 ideas that we had that were the tower defense story. But when we actually did settle on the tower defender sort of game concept, but with that tower defender game concept, one of the themes was medieval, 2 others were not medieval, but still had a very similar sort of game mechanic, but it was a different type of theme.
Interesting. Because I know a lot of people that are kind of, I wouldn't say put off by, but don't really care for having themes with the first games.
Sure.
So I was just curious if that was how you guys worked, and you just said put the theme on top because you liked it, or if it was integral from the beginning. So that's interesting to hear.
It was a little bit more of a mix. I think that fundamentally what we want to have is a great game. That's fundamentally what we want to have is a great game. If we can integrate a great theme with it, I think that makes it even better. And we'll find out when this particular game actually gets played how good it is in practice. But here was, I think, an example potentially, and like I said, time will tell. You guys will tell me. I won't. You guys are the judge, not me. We'll see how well those 2 mixed together, but it does seem to, I'll say that the game seems to have struck a chord with the community. Lots of people, it seems as if lots of people are excited about it, about the game itself, the game mechanics, but it feels like some people are really getting caught up kind of with the theme as well, and saying, hey, this is pretty interesting and very visual for the audience.
Oh, cool. I agree with that. I'm definitely on the side that really likes this game, especially how it's cool, and it's got, like you said, it's got its own story and its own theme. To sort of talk more about how you folks work with Disney, really quick, I want to just kind of ask, how did you guys get involved with them? What was the genesis of that relationship?
Greg Hale from Disney has been with us sort of on our game design committee for a few years now. So they've always had at least some type of presence sort of on our game design committee. Like I said, at least for the last few years. But it was really this year at I think at Dean's urging actually where we became very active and we said, okay, let's make an actual trip to Disney and understand what they do, how they do, and it really was a turning point, I think, in our thinking of how we sort of conceive of games and just the importance of having some story that goes along with the game that's more than just the story being I'm trying to score more points than the other guy. That there's something sort of more, maybe a little more interesting. Not that that's not interesting, and that can be very exciting because really that's all for the most part, sports are. It can be very exciting, but how do we add a little more something to it to make it emotionally engaging for the audience and for the players?
Yeah, I mean the game inherently, the way that it's been designed, you have objectives within the game which are separate from actually winning the match. And that's right, and they're sequential in some regard, right? You breach the defenses, and then you have to weaken the tower, and then you can capture the tower, and all of those gain tangible benefits for teams that aren't tied to winning the match, although they may help them win the match.
Sure.
And that's
right. Why. I mean, I'd argue that it's almost more like an esport than it is like a traditional sport with all of these side objectives or quests, so to speak.
Well, and the other thing to sort of look at is that, like, you don't ever see a board game like I'm going to talk about Ruth's favorite board game, which is Pandemic, right? It's a board game about global diseases, right? If the game was called Put Cubes on a Grid, people wouldn't like it very much. And
That's right.
it had a lot of it could have a lot of depth and be very cool for people who are into that. But
that's right.
It's a lot more cool to think of these as real things.
I think that's right. And if you're reminding me of just the little bit of the history of video games, a little bit that I know, if you go back to the, for example, Donkey Kong, where the first time, and I don't remember the designer's name, you guys probably know him, where he said, hey, let's put an actual story in the game instead of it just being pew, pew, pew and, running around and that kind of thing. And that's how the whole, Donkey Kong and Zelda, that's how that whole he showed that you could put generate emotion within a game by incorporating a story into it, and it just made them more compelling. The game mechanics themselves were already great, you could enjoy them, but this brought an extra depth, an extra element of feeling to it.
Right.
For sure. Yeah. And was Disney involved past that initial brainstorming? Did they come back and do a review? Okay.
Oh, absolutely. So we were having weekly calls. We had our own producer from Disney, Joey Caparosa. I think I pronounced his last name right. I know it's Joey anyway. A great, fantastic, wonderful guy. He actually was instrumental. He came out that one weekend and really helped us focus on the story. And we were having weekly calls actually with Disney where we said, this is what we're looking at, getting advice from them. How far do we go in incorporating theme elements? I mean, that's one of the reasons why one of the things we asked them was, how far do we go in going full out on this medieval theme? And they just said, just go for it. That's why you say, that's why the Cheval de Frise is a Cheval de Frise instead of teeter-totters. This way you have embrasures on the field and you have a batter on the field. All these, you have a portcullis. It's all these sort of terms that helps to at least set the mood, even though the community may decide that the best thing to call the Cheval de Frise is a teeter-totter, but still the way it's in the manual is a Cheval de Frise, and it's really trying to create an entire setting to kind of suck you in. Like, here's some unusual words that maybe not everyone in the community is familiar with. Let's try to create that sort of context to bring people into the story as best we can. And the same thing for, in terms of audience participation, that's why we've got the audience picking defenses for the rounds.
Interesting. That's really cool. Speaking of sort of audience participation, Ruth, you got to talk about field complexity?
Yeah, so with many years under my belt as setting up fields at events and lead queuing, there's a lot going on in this field.
Oh yeah.
What's the anticipated effect on the flow of events? How is it going to affect field reset between the matches? I know
Sure.
that the audience selected defenses are going to rotate out probably every 6 or 7 matches, depending on how many teams are at the event.
Yep, that's right.
Have you gotten it down to a science for the other 3 that are rotating out every match?
So it's not down to a science yet, but we did do testing and sort of simulation where we had staff members, and we brought robots out and we brought defenses out, and we said, okay, imagine that we've got to change all the defense. Every defense on the field has to change around, change location, or coming on and coming off, and bringing robots on at the same time. So we did some timing on that.
Mhm.
We think we're going to be okay. We think we can, keep the cycle times around 7 minutes. Is it going to be easy? No. There's going to be a lot of activity on the field, but we're actually planning to do some things that are helping out with field reset. For one thing, I'd already mentioned that all the defenses, you can't see it, just looking at the field, but all the defenses are actually on casters, so they
Yep.
can be rolled around. And we're even exploring the possibility. This hasn't been settled out yet. Now we don't know this, but if you look at the lights on the defenses, and this is something our programmers came up with, and we'll see if it actually goes forward. If you look at the lights on the defenses, there are essentially 3 segments of lights on each defense.
Right.
Well, 2 to the power of 3 is 8. There are 8 defenses. You can actually encode what defense needs to go where by using the lights. Now, that hasn't been built in yet. We're still thinking about that. There's still a lot of, to go between here and there, but essentially what we're trying to do is make it as easy as possible so that field reset crew knows what defense needs to go where. For example, if a defense is staying where it is, maybe those lights are green. You don't touch it. If a defense is moving to another location on the same side of the alliance, maybe those colors are yellow. So it's staying on the field, but it's moving. Maybe if it's red, it is coming completely off. All these are just ideas that we're working through, but we know we need to do something to make it as easy as painless, not pain-free, because those are 2 different things. Painless as possible to move to change the defenses out between matches.
Right. I also know that there are at least a few events who are looking to implement a position called the defensive coordinator, basically working within the queuing line. How is this going to affect, with teams that show up late to matches and that sort of
Sure.
thing?
So defense coordinator is actually a required position at every event. So that is a named position that the volunteer coordinators are going to be filled. And the defense coordinator, if you look through the tournament section of the manual, it explains what that person is doing. And that person is responsible for ensuring that the information from the alliances is, in terms of what defenses they want where, is properly entered in the system. And this is one of the reasons why the game manual is so long this year, is that we had to put in a lot of rules in terms of when teams need to be where in order to make their selections in time. And so what it comes down to, basically, there's a lot of rules around it, but essentially 2 matches before you're going to be on the field. So essentially when you're in the hole, you have to make your picks to give them to the defense coordinator. The defense coordinator takes the red side and the blue side, puts it in the system. It's linked in through FMS, prints something out. They separate it's going to be like a form that is perfed, so it can be easily torn. Each alliance gets the other alliance's picks at least the match before, and then at the same time the field supervisor knows what's going on. So the idea is you pick 2 matches before what defenses you want to have. 1 match before, you find out what defenses you're going to be going against, and then that gives you that 1 match to strategize with your alliance who's going to go where, who's going to be doing what. We've got these defenses. What are we going to do? Plan all that out. So there's going to be a lot of activity. Like with any great, with any potentially great game, there's a lot going on underneath the surface. That's one of the reasons why. The other reasons why this game to me is looking anyway pretty good is that from an audience perspective, you can come in and probably know nothing and say, okay, the red robots are attacking the blue tower. Every time the boulder goes in, I can see the light go down. The blue robots are attacking the red tower every time. But there's this entire layer or multiple layers of strategy underneath that you don't necessarily need to know to enjoy the game, but if you're a team, you're certainly going to want to know it.
Yeah.
Right. So speaking of the audience, can you just give us a little behind the scenes on how that became a thing, the audience selecting the defense in the third position?
We had been talking about really for some time, how do we get the audience themselves sort of more engaged in the game, in the matches. It's a challenge when you have 3,000 teams and you go to an event and there are 50 teams there, and you may not be familiar with, if you're just coming off the street or something, that we have a lot of those people who want to get more, and you're just coming off the street and you don't, maybe you know a couple of those teams. It's not like going to like a sporting event. I don't know how many teams there are in the NFL, 30 something or something. But anyway,
32.
and 32, okay.
Only one
and
Patriots.
The team that happens to live geographically closest to you is the best. I understand that. I understand, I understand how that works. But you have someone to root for, I guess. And that helps you keep, that's why they fill 80,000 person stadiums, because all these people want to come in and see their team, or they're hating on a team, or they're loving a team, or whatever is there. So how do we kind of break that with a number of teams that we have where you really just don't know, you don't see them that often? How do we get the audience emotionally engaged in the game? And we said, well, maybe they could somehow influence the game. Maybe there's a way to do that. But no, you can't do that because it's unfair, or you don't know what's going on. So anyway, we had a perfect opportunity here. We said, hey, we're going to have 5 defenses. One of them is going to be fixed. It's a low bar. One of them is going to be picked by the audience, and the audience can get excited. Even if you're not sure, maybe you just like the looks of the Cheval de Frise, or maybe you just like saying Cheval de Frise and you want to, pick that one to be your defense.
Or maybe you have no idea how to say Cheval de Frise.
Could be as well. And the other thing we did is because we had considered, well, what if people just vote by Twitter or something, and they've got this app that they use, and no way. So because we don't want the defenses going up on the screen and people suddenly going, like the audience going silent and looking down at their phones. That's not what we want. We want people coming out of their seats with excitement about picking these different, whether it's going to happen or not, I don't know. We're going to find out. But we want the event managers to have to put up police barricades to stop people from storming the field when they get to pick these defenses. Whether or not that's going to happen, I don't know. We don't want anyone to hurt. Safety first. But you know what I'm saying?
Barricades are for.
We want physical, emotional shouting and stomping on. You can't bring air horns or anything like that, but we just want physical engagement in picking these defenses. Like I said, we don't know to what extent it's going to happen. We're going to find out. I'm going to be excited for it.
I'm hyped.
So I got one more thing that I'm really excited about. We're bringing back win, loss, tie. While last year we had a really strong ranking system, and arguably it was putting the top 8 in a position that we hadn't seen it in a long time, we have an opportunity this year to see some mix-up in the rankings with not only the win-loss tie, but additional ranking points for breaching and an additional ranking point for challenging. Tell us a little bit about your guys' thought process through developing that, and also big thank you for not including cooperation.
Oh, come on.
You're welcome. So the defenses, of course, we wanted the defenses to be a very important part of the game. And we wanted to make sure that there was a strong incentive for teams to deal with those defenses. So we didn't want to have a situation where essentially a team could just keep going over the same defense over and over again, and come out sort of have that be a significant advantage. And so we looked at points and it wasn't quite right, giving points for defenses. We wanted to do a little more than that. And we saw that kind of the bridge balancing in what year was that? You guys would know off the top of your heads. I wouldn't.
Bridge balancing?
Yeah, bridge balancing.
2012.
2012 and 2001.
We saw how that encouraged some very interesting sort of dynamic in terms of people going for that sort of extra little excitement. And so when it came down to it, we wanted lots of activity around defenses. We wanted to have a strong incentive for teams to weaken the tower and to capture the tower, because we wanted this sort of rush towards the tower on opposite sides, at the end of the match. And when we put that all together, points really didn't work as we wanted them to. So we went for qualification. Just match points didn't work the way we wanted to. So we went for qualification points instead. And this, of course, gives an interesting dynamic. And some say, well, it's an advantage, or some say it's not an advantage. It causes more problems. But essentially, only one alliance can win the match, but both, either or none, can get breach or capture points.
And that's a nice change from 2012. I mean, you've got that neat mechanic of the bridge, but instead of having to work with your opponent and prep that before the match and figure out, I have to rely on these other teams that may not want to work with me, now I can lower a drawbridge from my partner, I can open a sally port, I can tip the teeter-totters or your cheval de frise if you prefer.
It's a real thing. If you look it up, it's on Wikipedia.
It's a real thing. We didn't make it up.
Yeah.
Could have fooled me. No, I think it's really pretty cool. The way that mechanic. I know I narrowed in on that right away with you've got one possibility for additional ranking points that can be effective or could potentially be accomplished by a single robot, and another opportunity for extra ranking points, which has to be accomplished by an entire alliance.
Right.
And it's weighted less than a win, which is nice, as opposed to potentially. I believe if the bridge was worth the same as a win, right?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, that was one of the issues.
But
we did what? No.
Well, look, we can.
I'm joking.
I wrote 3,000 words about different games, and we could talk about that game a lot. But Manisha, no. But that's a different thing. We have actually a question from the folks in the chat. We're going to put up real quick, and this is sort of on the topic we're talking about here. This is asked by a gentleman named Pierce. I can't pronounce that. I apologize. Do you think the drawbridge and Sallyport are really like cooperation in disguise? Are alliances coordinating to hold them open for their alliance partners? Frank, what are your thoughts on that? Is that sort of a thought you put into it when you came up with it?
Cooperation would be more along the lines of you holding the door open for the opposite alliance.
I do agree,
not your own alliance.
I think it's less cooperation.
If you hold the door open for your own alliance, I would call that teamwork, not cooperation.
Or just cooperating, perhaps. Yes.
Either just cooperate.
Yes, I agree.
That's what I would say.
It is kind of interesting to see that there's so many different kinds of defenses. When you guys came up with the game, did you guys have a list? Did you have some defenses that didn't make it?
Yeah, we did.
Really?
You're asking if any defenses didn't make the cut?
Yeah.
Yes, some defenses did not make the cut.
Oh boy.
We had there was one that was sort of on a like a round table on a gimbal that sort of rotated around. There was
just like a bunch of ball bearings.
And it was just, we looked at it. But for one thing, the component that was required to build that was really just too expensive for the teams. I mean, if you think that the boulders are expensive, you should have seen how much this thing cost. But
that's the reason that you decided not to do it, not because a gimbal ground table would be impossible.
It just didn't fit. It just didn't fit. We were able to drive over it.
Did it have a funny name?
It wasn't a good
we didn't come up with a name yet, but we probably would have called it the round table. That's how see.
That's cool.
You understand there, Ruth? You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. But then we had another one that was sort of a moat-like shape, but it had like cargo netting, or actually I think we put bungees kind of like in a web. Ooh. And then we realized that's a defense that you go into, and
don't come out of.
you're done. It's also
It's a trap.
It was a little bit. It was like, well, absolutely some teams could have figured it out, but if you were
It
like
was
a
called
box
the
bot or
rookie
something
killer, right?
that thing, spongy cords would get all wrapped around you. You were just
Oh, rookie
we
killer
would have
base.
needed we would have needed a backhoe to get their robot out of their defenses. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but there were a number of other defenses. See, I'm using too many words. I'm sorry. There were a lot of there were some defenses that we
Many.
All right.
Cool.
So I think we got one more question to come up here. This is from the crowd here. The question is, do you guys expect or anticipate or think you might be working with Disney in the future? Do you think was the experience positive?
Yes, we're hoping to. We're actually exchanging some emails right now. We want the partnership to kind of keep going for 2017. I expect we will, but we don't know, but we're hoping to. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. All right. So before we go, here actually we got another question coming up real quick. We're going to throw it up on the screen. All right, here we go. How about what aspect of this year's game keeps Frank awake at night?
I'll have to say that I sleep pretty well. I mean, just as a general rule, I sleep pretty well. I think I am interested to see how the whole logistics of the defense coordinator and the changing out the defenses is going to work. I mean, if you look at, in my mind anyway, this is kind of the one of the unique game mechanics that we have here is changing out these defenses and the various combinations you can have, and just having that all happen. It's going to be a little bit of a ballet, and we expect the practice day at regionals is going to get well used, to not just for the teams but also for the field crew as well. So there's definitely going to be a lot of activity and moving pieces. I mean, we have a game that there are more potential permutations of fields than we're actually going to have matches in 2016. Not that we're expecting a different field every time, because I know that there are going to be some defenses that are going to be favorites and not favorites and all that kind of thing. But there's just lots of combinations here that we could end up seeing. But we'll see. We don't know how much is going to vary, or they're going to teams alliances going to change things around. We don't know. This is why it's exciting and new.
Yeah, I got to say, I'm incredibly excited to see this game. I love a lot of aspects of it, and I think everybody else on GameSense, when we saw the game in our internal Slack, it was exploding with
oh, great.
So
well, it exploded after a period of about 5 minutes of complete dead, stunned silence.
Basically, yes. And then, which of course was preceded by the first stunned silence when we saw you in a knight's outfit at the.
Where did you learn your acting skills, by the way? Because that was so spot on.
Whose idea was that? Was that?
Okay, so that was Blair Huntermark, MC extraordinaire,
and
said,
actor.
"Hey, we could do like a Monty Python thing," and then from there, it just went on from there. And I have to tell you though, my concern is, when I was putting on that costume and the chainmail, I was sitting there thinking, my career has peaked. I have nowhere to go but down.
Yep.
But we really just had a lot of fun. It was just a lot of fun. And that's what we were trying to get. It was important for us to get that across to the community as well, because let's face it, the Middle Ages wasn't a great time for females or minorities or anybody that wasn't a rich white guy, which is, completely different from the way it is now. But just we wanted to make sure that we got across to the community that this is just supposed to be fun. It's not intended to be simulated warfare. You're not really killing the other guy. It's a game. It's supposed to be a fun game within the context of this larger party, which is what FRC events are.
Cool. Well, I got to say, we had a lot of fun having you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us once again. It was great to have you and to hear all your thoughts and comments and a little bit of behind the scenes. We're gonna let Frank go and hang out with his family for the evening. But we're going to be right back. We're going to go to a splash screen for a quick second, and we'll come right back, and you're going to hear the first strategic discussion of GameSense of the season as we give our impressions of the game. So, Frank, bye-bye now. It's really good to
Thanks
see
so
you again.
much, guys.
Thank you.
Frank.
Thanks so much. We'll see you.
Alrighty. We are back here. I want to once again thank Frank for joining us once again on GameSense. It was a lot of fun talking to him. If you're just tuning in now, the show will be posted on YouTube, so you won't miss any of the conversation we had with him earlier. But let's talk about our initial reactions to Stronghold. I'm going to throw it first to our newbie, to Ruth Toomey. Ruth, give us what are your initial reactions for Stronghold?
Oh my God, Field Reset is going to be a nightmare. Yeah, as a volunteer, mostly it was Field Reset's going to be a nightmare, queuing's going to be a nightmare, and then it was this is going to be the coolest game I have ever seen. I think defenses are going to play a bigger part in this than absolutely anything else. It'll be interesting to see if there's anybody who routinely tackles all 5 categories every match. But yeah.
Cool. Evan, what were your initial thoughts of the game when you first saw it come out?
Yeah, I was really excited. This is the first time that I can remember in a very long time coming out of the kickoff, really not feeling like, oh, they were so close to a good game, but they just messed up one part. There's been a couple years where you come away and go, really, that's what you did this year. And so for me, especially, I'm mentoring a rookie team this year. I was really excited, not because I think this is necessarily a great game for rookies. I think it's going to be very, very hard. But because as a mentor, I find it a lot easier to inspire my students if I'm really excited about what we're doing. And so I was really happy. I think it's going to be a really, really fun game to watch. It's very visual.
Yeah, I agree. When I first saw the game, I immediately saw like the one big flaw that sort of every first game has had, which is a meaning behind it. And I touched a little bit on this when we were talking with Frank about sort of the idea of top-down design and having a board game that's not just tic-tac-toe, right? Something with a story behind it. That having this ability to give your game depth greater than the number of points you score is huge, and it's great. And it's one of those things that if you look at like books or articles or things people write about game design, having a story and having a theme, like Frank said, is one of the most important things. It's something that First has been sort of half-heartedly doing. Lunacy, Recycle Rush were sort of half-hearted attempts at a theme. They sort of but I think this game took it and gave it a big old hug and just went down with it the whole way. Like it was like every single item on the field is named after a medieval thing. The whole game looks like a medieval theme. Just the fact that they didn't just put a hole in a wall, but made it look like a castle, which is useless, right? There's no the engineer in you says, oh, there's no reason for that junk. That makes it look good, right? But making it look good is like probably the thing that I am most happy with this game. Naveed, what were your initial reactions when you saw this game?
I really liked it. It right off the bat, it felt a lot like 2013 to me, which is one of my favorite games in recent years for a lot of reasons. This game has a lot of different options that you can make, and unlike in 2013, the climbing aspect being ridiculously hard and hurting a lot of teams in the design process, I feel like there are a lot of really good opportunities to design around the issues in this game and to make trade-offs. But I don't feel like there's any that's going to shoot teams in the foot too hard. I feel like it's a game that is easy enough that a top-tier team can design to play all aspects of the game fairly well. It's going to be difficult. I also think that higher level to mid-level teams will be able to do most, if not nearly all of the things well, and it gives a lot of flavor, a lot of options for teams to do different things.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of biting teams in the foot, one thing we didn't touch on while Frank was on the show was the infamous Q612
It is infamous.
FRC Q&A
6 hours ago.
showed up this morning. Yeah, about some of the field dimensions involving the rock wall and whether it's 4.5 or 5.5 inches wide. We specifically didn't touch upon it because First has updated their response to say that they're reconsidering and that they'll have a formal response on Friday. So they did hear us and all the concerns there, but certainly there are some aspects of this game which I think are very, very challenging and not ideal, especially with regards to the sheer number of field elements that teams have to build if they're trying to test and see if their robot is functional on them, and the fact that there are some fairly significant discrepancies between the team version of the elements, the wood versions, and possibly the real ones. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think about how that'll impact teams and their designs when they get to the field.
I think it's really unfortunate. I mean, on that note, many teams don't even get access to any field components throughout their build season. And a team who has to show up at a competition and has 8 new defenses that they may not have had the chance to fine-tune for or design the minutia to help them get through that, may see an additional amount of complexity there.
I'm definitely with Naveed on this one. And then the teams that have gone to the trouble of already building, not to pick on Robot in 3 Days, for example, most of those have already built their robot, and they were based on the published field dimensions, which are off by an inch in a pretty significant part. But they're possibly, as things stand now, via published updates, their measurements were off, which is incredibly frustrating, I would imagine. And I think there was also a very slight change with the hang bar, but that's half an inch compared to an inch. But it's changing. If you've already designed for that sweet spot, it's going to be, hopefully it's not throwing a wrench in the design process. But
and that was width, not depth, on the rung, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It went. It was originally 1 foot 9 inches wide, and now it is changed to 1 foot 8.5 inches wide.
Right. I mean, your percentage difference there is much smaller.
Right.
And I would be surprised if any teams are designing a climber, or I would caution any teams not to design a scaling device which is exactly 20 inches, wide. Or 20.5 or whatever it ends up being, whereas there are teams which are very specifically designing over the 4.5 inch depth of the rock wall.
It's really unfortunate. This kind of I'm glad it came to light now, because over the years of First, there have been a lot of the fields that people build are meant to work with dimensioned lumber you get at Home Depot, not with what the people who design them can do. So it's kind of unfortunate, but it's actually been a problem most years in First to a certain extent,
Yeah, I mean, for those of us that remember 2012, the way that those ramps actually behaved was significantly different than the team version of it. But I think the main concern here is more, not to hammer on the point too much, but the dynamics and the sheer number of all of the different ones.
Yeah.
It's a much higher likelihood that you're going to have teams showing up to competition with robots that worked on the team elements and don't work on at least some of the real field elements due to a combination of minor dimensional differences or surface texture or what have you.
And I sort of look at that as a additional challenge. The good news is that it's all pretty upfront, and the defenses, if as we sort of move into sort of the strategy of it, the defenses are probably one of the most important thing on the field, right? They are, at least in my opinion, I think they're like the most important game piece on the field. I would call them a game piece. I wouldn't call them an obstacle. I would call them a game piece.
Yeah, and talking about all these game pieces, these dimensions and tolerancing, I think there's an additional level of subtlety that some teams, especially at the lower levels, may not have picked up on yet, that we've seen addressed on Chief Delphi, like the low bar aperture. What height does it actually take for you to get underneath that low bar? And that the height is dependent on the angle that you're coming up that ramp underneath the low bar, and the fact that it's offset from center. Getting onto the batter, you can physically design a robot that cannot challenge. If you're designing to scale, 3 robots that are even not marginally small by any means, we're talking like you'd have to be down to 24 inches or less, are going to have issues with interacting with other teams that are next to them scaling if they are of a sizable dimension. So there are a lot of subtleties that some teams may not have picked up on if they haven't had a chance to walk around the field elements, build them, or really look into the dimensions that are given in the field drawings.
But that's why you watch GameSense. You learn about all these tips and tricks.
Yeah, but even with that, I think this year more than any year, I'm kind of expecting a larger number of robots to show up at events and not be able to do some of the things that they've specifically designed to do, which is, you can't have your cake and eat it too, right?
Yeah.
Those of us that are always clamoring for a game that requires a unique drive-based design, like this one does potentially, right? Well, yeah, you got to put a lot of thought into your drive base, but it also means that teams that can't just use the stock kit bot and expect to be able to not get stuck on half the field obstacles, right? Or build the kit bot and they can't actually challenge because they didn't pick the right dimensions, or those kinds of things. So,
But on the other hand, if you've got just a good drive base, you can do really well in this game.
right. And so I think there is a lot of encouragement from a strategy standpoint. Maybe it's time to move on to talking about the strategic part of this game. From a strategy standpoint, there is a significant number of points and contributions to your alliance that you can do with a really well thought out drive base, and no other end effectors whatsoever.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I was sort of mentioning before, the game piece you're going to interact with the most this season is going to be the defenses. And my buddy Steve Kane said it best when we were talking about this. Is that our buddy Steve Kane? We all know Steve. Is that if you think about if you want to have positive control of your game pieces, that's like one of those things that people who do strategy will always say, you got to have positive control of every game piece, because you can't hold it or you can't pick it up, you can't play with it. This year, you got to have positive control of your robot.
Yeah.
That's the thing that's going to get you everywhere.
Well, some of the other strategy aspects that I think are really appealing to me, the ranking points. We touched upon it a little bit earlier with Frank, but the fact that you can increase your ranking without winning a match. In fact, you can effectively win a match. It's very difficult, but if you are able to both breach the defenses and capture the tower with your alliance, it's equivalent to having won the match as far as your ranking points are concerned.
Yeah, if you're a strong robot and you get paired against two other really strong robots, if you're able to breach by yourself, you may lose that match, but at least you get that RP for breaching.
Yeah, I think we're going to see an interesting thing with breaching this year. Half the defenses you can just blow right over them. We're probably going to see a lot of, Leroy Jenkins type of robots. Probably a couple General Lees, and
Looks like those Duke boys up to no good again. Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how that has affected a lot of robot designs in terms of robustness and whether they're trading speed and agility for making sure their robot doesn't break when they go over that.
Yeah, I agree. We're going to see a lot of robots kind of pulling those maneuvers. But I think that if they do, they're going to find themselves at less of an advantage than if you are able to come up with a driveline that's more capable than that. It's easy to take the easy way out.
You really want to build in some margin of error, so if you get bumped a little bit on your run up to the defense, right? Because remember, if you're not already crossing the defense, your opponents can give you a little tap on the back bumper, and you might not be going over quite as General Lee as you were hoping. But I think a well thought out drivetrain is going to be paramount here, and also just as important, well built, well secured electronics. Robots are going over these things are going to have a lot of bumps, a lot of bounces, especially if you're trying to brute force it with some speed. I remember back in 2010, Holy Cows had a 10-wheel drivetrain with small diameter, your standard aluminum wheels, and they would come flying over that bump. And they said that before they were willing to sign off on their robot and pack it up for competition, they had to drive over that bump 50 times in a row without having any electrical or mechanical failures.
Wow.
And there's a very similar shock to the system on some of these too. So be careful out there.
Yeah, don't forget your zip ties and your hot glue, because it's going to be important putting everything together.
Is hot glue legal?
For electrical connections, I believe it is. It's an insulator, right?
Sure.
Well, okay. How about this?
It has been.
Look at the
not
rules
some
before you
years.
do what
Yeah.
I say.
Yeah.
It used to be
Okay,
legal.
we've come very far. A lot of teams are using Andersons on tons of things. There are different ways to mount PWM cables without hopefully having to glue them to
Yeah.
your Jaguar like you may have thought of doing in the past.
A little bit of a shameless plug. 971 developed a board that plugs into the MXP port that's being sold by West Coast Products, which uses Molex connectors with detents on the top. Our team bought 2 of them just because that way we don't have to worry about the PWM cables shaking loose out of the Robo Rio. It's got a detent in it. It's going to stay locked in. So that's, there's solutions to it out there.
Yeah. I think we actually have a question that we had coming through the wire here. Let's put it up here.
Ooh.
Oh, here we go. This is from, who's the question asker? FM Eric 7? FM Eric 7, yeah. FM Eric, Frank M Eric 7 asks, are the scaling points worth it? So let's review. Scaling points, one robot scaling is worth 15 points. And it counts as a challenge to the tower whether you're on the batter or the scale.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and it's 15 points regardless of if the tower is weakened. The points have nothing to do with capturing, or are independent of capturing the tower.
Yeah, I got confused about that when I saw the animation before I read the rules.
Yeah.
But
read the rules.
Yes.
You also get points for being on the batter, though.
Yes. So that's the question.
That's true.
Is it worth?
It's a Delta 10. I'll just put in my 2 cents. I think it's worth it if you can do most of the other aspects of the game. You're talking about 2 balls in the high goal makes the difference between a challenge and a scale, right? Or 5 balls in the low goal, right? Personally, I think it's definitely going to be something we see at the high levels of play, right? It's a lot like the 30-point climb, not quite as difficult, but still in terms of once you've run out of discs, you can't run out of balls, but once you've reached sort of a maximum cap of points that your robot can effectively achieve, or a robot can effectively achieve in a match, that's where you get your extra points from.
Mm-hmm.
Evan, you say that it's very similar to the 30-point climb. If you look at the delta points that you're getting out of it, if all 3 teams on your alliance make the scale, that is a 30-point climb, and that can be a potentially big swing at the end of the match.
Yeah.
Because remember, you still get 2 ranking points for winning the match, regardless of what you get for capturing the tower and breaching the defenses. So that's not necessarily something to look down your nose at.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly, I think that Ruth hit on an important point about the scaling is that when it's one robot scaling over going on the batter, it's kind of like, right, woo, woo, it's actually pretty equivalent in points to the 2010 game if you could climb on top of one of your other robots.
I see what you did there.
But just points, not just difficulty, right? But if you get all 3, it can be enough to swing a match, which I think gives to Evan's point that this is going to become a huge thing later on if robots can do everything.
Yeah.
So the question that Frank asked, are the scaling points worth it? I think right off the bat, within the first few days, some people were willing to say, oh, it's a red herring. In 2013, climbing was a red herring. That was the last time we had to climb or scale. And there was a much greater level of design difficulty required to climb that versus what we have now. And I think that perhaps right off the bat, some people took that into consideration, and after thinking about it longer, from a design perspective, it is significantly, if not orders of magnitude, easier to design for scaling this tower than it was in 2013.
Yeah, I think it comes down to what I think it's worth it, right? But it depends on what your other priorities are and what your resources are as a team, right? If I can choose to either be able to scale the tower or go cross a lot of defenses, I think crossing the defenses is more worth it. But if my choice is between scaling the tower and shooting, and I haven't traditionally built a lot of really good, powerful shooters as a team, maybe I'd think about scaling. I don't think from a mechanism standpoint it's particularly difficult. I think from a game standpoint, it's certainly valuable. I mean, points are points, right?
Yeah.
It just comes down to what design trade-offs your team is able or willing to make various parts of the game possible.
Yeah, and I think one thing to remember too is that it isn't as easy as it could be, because we have to keep ourselves within the 15-inch frame extension.
Mm-hmm.
If it was that easy, we could theoretically just drop a hook on there and just winch yourself up, kind of like 67 2010, but it's a little more challenging.
Yeah. I also don't think that it's going to be a very interesting end game to watch, but I think that we're not going to see a lot of fast climbers. So it's not going to be a very explosive, super exciting end of the match, dissimilar from what you saw from, example 2K7, where you had robots zooming up ramps on other robots to, potentially
Or
get
not
a big
going up
swing.
ramps.
Or not going up ramps.
Or 179.
Yeah, it's going to be... It'll be interesting to see how exciting of an end game it's going to shake out. I think this is going to be one of those games where most of the match is actually going to be really, really exciting to watch. And the end of it, you'll be able to guess with 15 seconds left, who's going to come out with it on top, unless somebody has, a lightning fast scaler.
Yeah. Well, the thing to remember is that there are a lot of off-the-shelf power takeoff options that you can do for robots. The question is it worth the time and the development to get that to go? Or is it better to just stick one or two mini sims on a gearbox and just go with it? Because we have, this is the other thing to remember too, is we have
lots of options,
tons of power. Like it's crazy. We have, the only limit for motors is 6 sims. That's crazy. It's a lot of power. So,
and what your battery can handle.
Yeah, and
Don't
what your battery can
forget
handle.
about your battery.
Yes. Well, it's hard to kill your battery in a match unless you're going absolutely crazy. You're much more likely to brown out your Cerio if you're doing 6 or 7 sims at a time.
Fair enough.
But because the 120 amp breaker does manage to get that there.
Yeah.
What are some other thoughts people have about this game compared to other years? Evan, you were saying something?
Yeah. Okay. Sure. I think this game is it borrows a lot of elements from other previous years. As we've talked about, there's a lot of natural comparisons, but it does so in a very unique way. And I think that's why I like it. Right? It's like it's not just that the rock wall is the barrier from 2012. Right? It's not the Cheval de Frise. Sure, it's a teeter-totter, but it's not at all the same teeter-totter that we've ever dealt with before.
Yeah.
Right? The hanging bar. Yeah, it's a hanging bar. We've done hanging all the time, but the rules about how you can hang are different this time. And it's exciting because you can look to the past for inspiration, and there may be some solutions there, but they're not because there's so many different combinations, right? That rock wall isn't going to be on the field every match. So just designing a drivetrain that's really good at getting over the rock wall and saying, I'm going to use Team X's drivetrain from 2012 because it worked, right? Well, okay, but now you've got a whole bunch of other ones that you can or cannot maybe contend with. So that's really cool to me.
Yeah. One thing I'm thinking that might maybe come back sort of as what we saw in 2014, there's a lot of value to capturing the tower. So if you can just get the balls into the goals, whether it's high or low, 2014 saw a lot of low goal shooting, especially at the district and regional level. I think we're going to see a lot of low goal scoring this year.
Especially in qualification matches.
Absolutely, yeah. And even in eliminations, getting the bonus points for capturing the tower is still worth a lot of points. It's
you take that risk from not being able to bring that tower to 0 health, and it's definitely not worth it.
Yeah, if we can't get it to 0, then it's definitely not worth. But if you, it's one. I think that's one of the good things about this game is that it offers you a non-linear strategic objective, right? It gives you, even though it goes down linearly, that's not what I mean. It means that you have multiple vectors of attack. Instead, it's not just build stack, build more stack, shoot frisbee, shoot more frisbee. You have a ton of different things, or at least several different things you can accomplish to end the game and win the match. Yeah. All right, so I think with that, we're going to go to our last question of the night before we say goodnight, and we're going to put up on the screen right about now. Here it comes. All right, of the 32 robots on Einstein, how many robots will be able to fit under the low bar? Bold predictions time, starting with Ruth. Ruth, what are your thoughts? What's your bold prediction?
How many will fit under the low bar?
out of the 32 on Einstein this year?
I'd say 28.
28. Ooh, interesting.
Yeah.
Naveed.
That's what I was going to say. So, to make things interesting, I think there are going to be a lot of teams at the higher tier, like we're talking top 25 teams at championship, that can do low bar and can also do everything else well. And that maybe they're looking for somebody who can increase their point potential. If your top 2 robots on your alliance can breach all of the defenses, I'm going to say we'll go a little bit less. We'll go 24, 26. We'll make it 25. Split the difference.
Okay. Before we go to Evan, I'm gonna tell people from the group. Ty, who is watching, he predicts 24. Stephanie predicts 16. That's 2 on every alliance. Evan, give us your bold prediction.
I was gonna say 16 as well. Stephanie sniped me on that one.
Hey, you can say
But-
same thing.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be roughly half, and the reason why is because I think at the Einstein level, that scaling is going to be really important. And I think once you start wrapping around picks, you don't really need 3 robots that can
Right.
all go under the low bar, right? Only 2 of them actually have to. Only one of them has to for points, right? 2 of them probably makes it a little bit easier for everybody to get around, right? And one of them can have a really nice auto that goes underneath or whatever. But that third robot, I really think is going to be, my opinion, prioritizing scaling because, and maybe shooting or whatever, but they don't have to be the breaker of all defenses because your first 2 are probably going to be capable of that. Bearing in mind that those are probably going to be the higher ranked robots because they have been breaching defenses all game. And I think more often than not, you're going to find more reliable scalers which can't fit under the low bar than you will find reliable scalers at that point in the draft that can. So I think you're going to be far closer to 50% of the teams on Einstein that can fit under the low bar than a higher.
All right, I see what you mean. But because it's bold predictions time, I'm predicting 30.
Wow!
Because I think that you are absolutely correct. You don't need everybody to be able to go under the low bar. That's legit. You don't have to do that. I think you're going to see a lot of teams doing that. I think you're going to see that the thing that will drive lots of teams will be driven to go under the low bar because it's always there. It's in the same spot. It's easy to traverse the defense in autonomous mode and then
Gives you a
to
good chunk of points.
line up and score. So there's a ton of other things that lead you down the path. So that we're going to see. The only reason I say that many because there's going to be so many robots that are low and can go under the low bar. If we look at most of the robots in 3 days, I believe most of them are about that size, are about low bar size. And if you want to, think not just from like, oh, people can build those robots, but that's the first idea people go to. I think it's going to be more. I think it's going to be high. But that being said, I think you're right, Evan.
Well, you heard it here
Your logic
first.
is sound, but if you meta it out, it ends up being a little bit more.
Interesting. I will remind you that we are, if we follow the trend from last year, we are at 75 team divisions.
True.
Just want to point that out.
And the argument there, I would say, counter argument, is there are a handful of teams that some of us may have personally know of that have abandoned the low bar in an effort to do a bunch of other things because they assume they'll be able to get a partner that can do the low bar.
Eventually.
So
It's like double meta.
There will be
It is.
there will be an interesting economy this year with low bar versus not low bar robots, and at any given event, how many low bar robots versus not low bar robots there are.
I'm gonna.
Yeah.
They'll be big at districts.
I'm gonna throw in a potential red herring here. Basically, an asterisk to my prediction. I'm gonna say that there will be teams that build a robot with a modular superstructure that they can add or remove.
Yep.
Depending on what their strategy is.
So
There
like they
are
have a
teams doing
hanger,
it.
and they take it off and they go into the low bar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
There are teams doing it.
I like the way you think.
That's right. We can neither confirm nor deny that there are teams doing it either.
I can confirm.
All right. But with that, everybody, we've already gone over. We figured it was okay to go a few minutes over because we had a lot of great talking with Frank today. But I want to thank everybody who's watched us today. If you're watching us on YouTube, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to the various things we have. We got Facebook, Twitter, we got Twitch, we got YouTube, we got the Snapchat. I hear the kids use the Snapchat these days. It's pretty popular with the young folks these days, so go ahead and do that, whatever it is. Another reminder is that we do GameSense every week during the build season. Excuse me, during the competition season.
Oh, please don't.
Ugh, we got a robot to build. Every week in the competition season, starting before week 1, we'll definitely say before week 1, we have a show Wednesdays, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. You can watch us here on Twitch or on YouTube. And we'll be doing that all the way through to the end of championships and maybe a little bit beyond. So for that, I want to thank everybody on behalf of everyone here on GameSense. Hope you have a good evening and good luck this build season. We'll see you in a couple weeks, everybody.